Hello everybody, my name is Nairi and this is Fly Little Birds, and today I'm going to talk to you about behaviours that adopted and foster children have, and actually whether that's any different from if you were parenting children that you'd given birth to. And so I just want to say this is my experience, this is how I see it. And so I have 5 birth children and 2 adopted sons who were our foster boys, and so I feel like I can speak from experience. So the first thing that I think is quite noticeable with the boys that is different from my children is they never want to be too far away from Tim and I. So Tim and I don't work anymore, in the sense that we've actually retired from our day jobs that we did have, but we both have busy retirements then and hobbies and stuff like that. So I'm an artist and I write as well, and Tim does a lot of stuff in the community. We are at home when they come home from school. However, if we're not at home when they come home from school, or one of us is somewhere else, even if one of us is in the garden or in the office, they will always say without fail, where is either mum or dad? So if I'm there in the kitchen and Tim's not around, they'll be like, where is dad? Even though they haven't looked around the rest of the house, they'll be, where is dad? Because they're so used to us being there when they get home from school, and they really struggle when we're not. They also struggle if one of us isn't there to put them to bed. Now, bearing in mind we've had them since they were 2 and 3, and now they are nearly 13 and 14, and they still want a bedtime routine to be quite tight. Now this of course could be my experience, because I feel like our boys developmentally are further behind. I guess would be that if you're adopting or fostering, you probably have similar experiences to me. So let me know in the comments if you do have the same thing, that your adopted children or foster children even want to know where you are all the time. So they like to have a tight bedtime routine. They like to know that certain things are going to happen, almost to the extent that even when the routine is out of sync, out of whack, and it's not right, they still hold on to that. So that can be quite frustrating, because it'll always be, well, why haven't you done your teeth yet? And why haven't you gone in and got your water ready? And it's always because, well, I never do, so I'm not going to start now. So yeah, anyway, so that moves me on to, in my opinion, they want more rigidity, more routine. Bearing in mind that I've had 5 birth children and they were all different, so some of them liked routine more than others. Some of them were a little bit more laid back about life and wanted to experiment a little bit more, and others wanted to know a little bit more where you were and what the routine was. However, I would say that with the boys, they are so much more for routine and really struggle with any type of change whatsoever. So it will be, if the tea is a little bit later, so we normally have our meal around about 5:30, 6 o'clock. So if it's getting past that time, I'll guarantee that one of them will say, what are we having for tea? And what he really means is, you haven't forgotten that we need to be cooking tea, have you? And once I kind of had a bit of a joke. I mean, you need to bear in mind that we've had them for a long time, so I can get away with this a little bit. So don't think I'm being cruel. I'm not being cruel. But one night I just said, we're not having anything. And the older one looked at me as if to say, and then I kind of give him eye contact. And then he went, you're joking, aren't you? I went, well, of course I'm joking. I'm going to feed you, aren't I? I've fed you for the last 10 years, so I am going to feed you. So yeah, they want tight routines, and that will also spill over into, this is kind of my next point, who we have in the house and how long we have them in the house for and what they're doing. So if they were to have friends in the house, that would be different. They would be okay with that, although I have noticed that they will take their friends to places that you wouldn't expect children to normally do. So sometimes they will show them how much food is in the cupboards. I'm sure you can guess what that goes back to. Sometimes they will kind of still try to keep around close to Tim and I when they bring friends in, whereas other children wouldn't necessarily do that, in my experience anyway. So it'd be really hard for them to accept us having friends in the house that they don't know. They really struggle with that, and they are even quite observant as to when the shopping delivery man is there and whether he's a different shopping delivery man. So if we have different friends in the house that they don't know, they really struggle with that, and they'll be very aware, hyper vigilant, keeping an eye on what's going on. When we have our adult children in the house, as I say, we've got 5, then it's not so bad. And that will bring me on to the next thing, which is they're quite cautious with different activities. Not as bad as they used to be. I mean, in the early days, they really didn't want to do anything new or different, and that caused quite a lot of issues because we might think something was really nice for them to do. We might take them to a really nice place, party, event, and they would absolutely hate it because it was different and new. So it's not as bad as that. But if you suggest something different to them, then they'll be quite cautious over it. So say, for example, we've taken them to a firework display before, but we haven't taken them to the circus, then they'll be up for the firework display, but they'll be very, very anxious about the circus. And my example of that is going to the theatre. And I can understand, I mean, I'm quite an anxious person myself, so I kind of get this. They will treat that as a new event every time. And so when they're coming into a place where there's lots of people, they're normally very, very anxious. And we might have, you know, a good whole day of anxiety leading up to doing that thing. So that's another example of how things are a little different. I've mentioned this before in my videos as well, leading on from things like new shows and events like that, where you've got people performing and that type of thing. I've got to be a lot more careful what I expose the boys to in terms of their age. So you may find that with, you know, birth children, that they're less anxious when it comes to watching stuff on the telly, and they can kind of cope with it a little bit more. So I'm not suggesting that you expose children to more than what the recommended age is. I'm not suggesting that at all. In fact, I'm definitely not suggesting that. But I think for the boys, I have to know what's going to be in that film. So even if they are of an age, because they're both over 12, I'll definitely have to know what's in that film. And I'll know that some 12s will be fine because of the content, even if some of the content's a little bit unsuitable, but other things definitely won't be. So if there's a sinister character that kind of preys on people in any way, or frightening scenes, I'll need to be aware of that. And it might actually cause my older son more problems than my younger son, because he has bedwetting problem when he's anxious. So yeah, I have to be really careful. And the thing around that as well is they have friends and friendship groups where those friendship groups are always trying to push the, you know, the limits and the boundaries, and that's what teenagers do. Having had 5, for the most part anyway, that's what teenagers do. And if they don't do it when they're teenagers, then they kind of try to do that more when they're adults, I think. Then those friendship peer groups are trying to always influence the boys on what they should and shouldn't be doing, and they get teased quite a lot. So if I've held them back from a particular game or gaming situation or TV program, then they'll get teased, and that's really, really difficult, because I know what they're capable of. And because one of them has quite an addictive nature anyway, it's not always even about whether something's frightening, it's whether the stimulation and excitement levels get so much that actually he can't cope with it, and then he can't come off of that video game. So yes, that causes issues because they're sometimes different from their peers, but I feel as a parent I've got to try and put those boundaries in place for them, because I know what they cannot cope with. So another difference that I've noticed, and the different behaviour I've noticed, is sometimes emotionally and with peers, they really, really struggle to see what the appropriate level of behaviour is, the appropriate reaction to a situation is. And I find with both of them, they can bring trouble on themselves, but they don't always realise they're doing it. So they might go in to intervene into a situation, or they might say something back to another child that seems like the right thing at the time. Or they may try to home in on one particular friendship, and then that's all at the exclusion of other friendships. And all of those things can cause trouble for them and actually get them into not necessarily physical fights, but verbal fights over things, and actually mean that they can become quite unpopular, and they've actually instigated then a big whole kind of friendship group problem, and they've almost not realised they've done it. So I'm finding other behaviours as well, which I think specifically to my boys, is developmentally they have a lot of struggles and difficulties, and so therefore they don't really want to apply themselves sometimes. So they'll want to do things that they know are satisfying and easy for them, but they don't necessarily want to apply themselves to any schoolwork whatsoever, or anything that taxes them with their intelligence and their cognitive ability. And that's because they really struggle to process and kind of process things through their memory. So memory processing is a real problem for them. And so actually, you know, when they get home from school, they're exhausted and they don't want to do the homework. They don't want to do anything that's kind of more structured. They do sometimes enjoy learning, but you know, enough's enough. What they do at school is absolutely enough and they don't want to do anymore. I hope that's helped you. Please subscribe to Fly Little Birds if it has, if you want to learn about fostering, adoption, childhood trauma, and check out my channel for different playlists. I'll link the therapeutic playlist at the end for you. Thank you.